All right, we are officially live. Hey there, welcome to another Unity game developer discussion and code review. This is my podcast, or sorry, my live stream with Jason here. If you don't know who I am, I'm Charles Amat. This is Infallible Code, and with me is Jason Story. He is a software developer, and today we're just going to be discussing Unity game development, programming, and game design. And then towards the end, we'll also be doing a code review. So we've got some code lined up. If you'd like to submit some code for code review, you can go to infalliblecode.com/code-review. And then there's going to be a link for that in the description of this video. Before we dive into the questions, looks like we've already got one. I just want to do a little bit of bookkeeping here. Make sure that you check out the clips from last week's stream. It's a great way to support the channel is to just check out those clips, put a like on there and a comment. As we had a lot of great discussions last week, and I think you all agree. So if you haven't seen those, be sure to check those out. Also, just put out a video on Sunday, so check that out as well and leave a like and a comment, all that jazz, all that YouTube creator jazz. Anything you'd like to say, Jason, before we jump into it?
I think you covered all of it,
All right.
Let's dive right in.
Hey, looks like we got Jason Wyman here. Speaking of my latest video, I'm so sorry, Jason. I'm going to take this as a public opportunity to apologize. I totally said your name wrong, and I said the wrong game that you're working on, but I updated that in the description there, so hopefully that was enough.
Don't forget to also apologize that you just said Jason Wiseman instead of Wyman.
No, I didn't. I said Jason Wyman.
Just trying to catch you off guard. See?
Don't mess with me, man. Awesome. So it looks like we got a good stream today, obviously. So why don't we dive into that first question, which is, do you have at least one job or project done that you look at a few years later and say that there's nothing to improve or refactor? And yeah, Hello World does not count. So I've got some thoughts on that. What do you think, Jason?
You go first on this one. I'm trying to go through some in my head.
Fair enough. So my initial thought was obviously every project could be improved, and every project could use some refactoring. But from a pragmatic standpoint, even though every project could be written better or more succinctly or use better design patterns or whatever it might be, I think that there are some projects that don't really need to be refactored from a pragmatic standpoint, just because they serve the purpose. And like the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Meaning, if the project is never going to be iterated on, meaning no features are ever going to be added, no customer or user is ever going to want to add functionality, then realistically, if you're providing value with that piece of software or that game or project, then I'd argue that there's no need to refactor it or change it. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I say there's two kinds of projects, right? So it's the kind of work I do. There's either projects I do for myself or there's projects I do as a contractor or on someone else's team. In the case where I'm on someone else's team, I find just from a psychological perspective, it's easier to divorce yourself from the objectives of the entire project and ownership of it and just sort of like focus on your area. It isn't to say you don't have feedback and you don't engage with wanting it to succeed, but it's sort of keeping your focus on the use cases you're responsible for is usually what I do. And so if you take it to that extreme and say, are there systems or components of another project that you've done you're happy with and you just sort of nothing else to change on? There's a few. Mostly I did things like keyboard virtualizers, sort of like in Unity, there's like a virtual keyboard that would type as you type and types on a screen and stuff, and it has nice animations.
That's cool.
Nice systems for that with like, command queues and all sorts of nice features. I've got other stuff too in the past for event systems and pooling systems and all stuff that I've used numerous projects that I'm quite happy with. As for like a whole cohesive project, to be honest, not really, but only because it's either someone else's project and there's always something you'd like to add, or it's your project. And let's be real, if you're the product owner, there's infinite amount of features you're going to want to add. You're never going to say it's done. If it's a question of whether it's done feature-wise or done in terms of refactoring, I don't know. There are points where you look at code and say any more refactoring I'll be doing will be just sort of self-congratulations, adding extra features and sort of, I don't know, messing with it.
That's my favorite type of refactoring.
Yeah, yeah, where you say, I know it works, but let's add, 12 more classes just arbitrarily because it's fun. Yeah, no, that's a bad idea. And usually, if you get to the point where you start questioning, can I refactor this perfectly working and clean code further? The answer is don't, even if you can realistically, until new features come along. So not really, not. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've kind of stopped and went, you know, this is perfect, but at the same time, it's it's good enough. And I think that's quite frankly the better goal. What was it?
Yeah.
Perfect's the enemy of done, I think they say.
Oh well, yeah,
So
that's good.
stick with what you need to do, and that's good enough.
Yeah, and like what was mentioned in chat here, YAGNI, you ain't gonna need it, is what that stands for.
And don't forget KISS. Keep it simple,
Keep it
stupid.
simple, stupid. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you really should just approach code in general in that way. And that is you write what you need. And that should be included when you're looking back at a project and trying to determine or a piece of code or a feature. Do I need to refactor this? Do I need to rewrite it? And the question really should be first, do I need to refactor this? And sure, you should always approach writing code, with the solid principles and clean coding and all those things that make it flexible and open to change in the future. But really, I think for the most part, refactoring should be driven by a need to refactor. And
Yeah,
that's,
I've kind of
yeah.
figured out there's like three ways you can talk about your code. You can say, is it clean? You can say, does it do what I need it to do? And three, is it extensible? And I find that asking, is it clean, is kind of a nebulous and pointless question because there's always standards that are different from yours. There's always extra stuff you can do. So I try to avoid asking myself, is my code clean enough or is it refactored enough? I prefer to say, does it one, do what I actually was paid to do or the task is required? And if it does it do so in a way that I can assume the next extensible features to be added and I can add those without having to rewrite what's here? And if I can do both of those things, even if it's technically a mess, it hits every goal I actually have. It's just in order to get to that second goal of being able to be extensible, probably will be clean. It's very hard to write code that's not clean and easily extensible. So I would
Yeah.
make those two the goal, not the clean code per se.
See, it sounds like the classic Venn diagram where you've got like the three circles, and you can only pick one, or you can only pick two out of the three.
Two out of the three, yeah.
There's some sort of like point that as it moves around, you get some some percentage of each one. But yeah, it sounds about right. So I guess the answer to the question is yes and no. It all depends.
Yeah, I'm glad we can give you a very concrete answer on that.
It's like most programming questions I get are like the answer is like, well, it kind of depends. What are you trying to do here? So I guess the first question I would ask myself in that situation is, do I need to refactor? Otherwise, nah, I wouldn't refactor it. I mean, I probably would because I'm an anal and a perfectionist, but I wouldn't recommend. Do as I say, not as I do.
You can also take like a small aside and ask sort of like the hidden underlying question to that, which is, have you ever written code you're proud of when you open it again a second time? That's kind of a slightly different question. And oftentimes you'll open old code and you'll be kind of horrified because just the nature of having a career that involves learning means a week goes by and you've learned something new. And by the time you open old code, you're like, I could have done that better. I could have done it more efficiently. There's always something you can do to change it. But I will admit there are some times where I've been given a project that I've done. And again, because I do contracting mostly, I've handed it off to a client and I've walked away. And then 6 months later or a year later, they'll come back and say, we like the last thing. Can you add these two new features? And I'll open it and go, oh God, I haven't seen this thing in a year. What does it look like? And it's like, I look at it and I go, okay, I can see what it's doing. I don't remember writing it, but I can read it.
Yeah.
And then I have to add a new feature. And I add the feature and it takes me a day. And I'm like, okay, that was good. I put the right hooks in place. It was easy for me to inject new behaviors. And then you're a bit proud of yourself. Then you're like, I did it. I built the system with the expectation for features to come down the pipeline, and I guessed to the right boundary lines.
Yeah.
And that's the closest I've ever gotten to. It may not be perfect, but it's exactly what I wanted it to be, and I kind of proved it later on. So you do sometimes get that.
Yeah, I had a similar experience where I had written an integration not related to game development. Sorry, it was just some boring business integration that I wrote, and I wrote it. A couple months went by, and I actually had to fly to the company whose application I was integrating with, and I had to test it in front of their QA guy, and this guy ran it through the ringer. It was crazy.
Classic QA people, they just destroy your code every time.
Dude,
Yeah.
it was wild. He wouldn't tell me what he was doing too. He'd just be like, "I'm gonna test this now," and then he'd be like, "Can you set up your application to do this?" And it's like, "Okay," and then he would like slam it. But over the course of that QA experience, there were things that I had to change, and I had flown into their headquarters, and I was there for about I think it was 4 days, and it was one of those things where they were like, "Listen, if we get done early, you can fly back early." And I was like, "Heck yeah, I want to go," because it was in the middle of nowhere. But over the course of this QA process, he found things that truly were broken, and then I had to fix. And I was pleased because while I hadn't looked at the code in a while, I mean, this is kind of like a humble brag, I guess. I was able to very easily fix all the things that he found, and I was like, wow, that right there, honestly, is my anecdote of the power of clean coding, following practices, even though it took longer to sort of reason about the code when I first wrote it. And it really did pay off in a huge way. So yeah, it was great. It's my anecdote.
To play devil's advocate on that, I have done the opposite too. So there was one system I wrote once, which was a sort of a single sign-on system. The idea was multiple people were using a gateway portal that I'd written to take their current Active Directory login details and log them into various websites. So connected APIs and sort of bypassed a lot of the login details because it was an internal system, and it was one of those companies where you actually had a key fob at your computer to scan to let yourself into the computer. So they really cared about their security. So the system I wrote was, can I log you in automatically without having to distribute passwords for every single sub account? And so that was fine. System worked great. And I had a built-in logger that would log various different, at this time, this person logged in, or this person failed, they didn't have access to the system, and so on. And I wrote it as a text file, and it would build up, and I made sure, because I've been through this before, you don't let the text file get too big, otherwise it'll cause issues and crash servers. So you let it get to a certain size, you make new files based on dates and per day, and then you sort of fill it up with all the different login information. And it was all great, all worked fine. And the way I did it is I used a kind of arbitrarily custom log notation, right? I wrote it in as person's name, tab, dash, whether or not they had access, time of date in a sort of a UTC format or whatever, and it all worked fine. But then, as I said, I get a request down the pipeline maybe 4 months later, and they go, "Oh, we want to be able to search through the history of people who've logged in." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't take that into account as a feature that might happen." So I had to now write code that would parse my printed strings in my text files because I didn't put them in a sensible format like CSV, like a sane person should have done. So I had to write this horribly hacky code that would read back the strings and like literally count spaces and then chop on
Oh my gosh.
characters and use indexes. And then because I knew certain messages were longer than others, I had to like search for words to estimate the length of the message and then cut it. It was horrible and it was a nightmare. But when I was done, I took the whole lot. It would cut to CSV, and I would then read the CSV back in and generate a HTML grid that would let me parse and search it. So it was really cool and looked very simple at the outset. And the boss, she was very happy because like it was what she asked for. But it took me 2.5 weeks to write the parser, do the thing, write the associated website, write the new CSV parser, and it was like, if I'd just written it right, if I'd done it the right way the first time, it would have honestly taken me 3 days.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I didn't tell her that, but that's one of those little life lessons where it's sort of, if you keep an eye on what will probably happen down the line, you write the code with that eye for change, and it's like that's the real point of clean code. Save yourself lots of extra work in the future.
Yeah. Definitely. I see we got a super chat from In and Out. Thank you very much. And it's directed at Jason. So I think I'm gonna have to start paying you some sort of commission here. What kind of work does Jason do as a software developer? Does he still have to worry about optimization the way that game developers do?
I do in certain cases. So I guess the simplest way to describe my job is I do contract work in very discrete cases. So I would do work for a marketing firm. So for example, if somebody has a TV show or a movie, or they own the rights to some IP and they're going to do a soft launch of some new thing, they might want an associated VR game or an associated AR game, or they might want some other marketing material. And so I might have to make something for VR or AR. And if that's the case, optimization is extremely important. So for people who understand how the rendering system works in VR and how it renders twice, your draw call count is super important. Your overdraw is insanely important. And you've got a ton of rules for trying to avoid any kind of overhead, because the Oculus Store in particular is really kind of very particular about what they'll allow on based on getting certain kinds of judders and hitches. So you have to keep a fairly consistent frame rate. So there's a lot of stuff to consider there, and it mostly boils down to avoiding a lot of garbage collection hitches. So I do in those cases, but realistically, they represent 30% of my day job. The other stuff I normally do would be things like, but let's see, if say you were doing a trade show, so you owned a unique piece of hardware, some new, let's not call it a gimmick, but let's say some fun toy, some sort of interesting piece of hardware, or you have some other thing you're trying to advertise, or a software stack, or you've got like a new spatial audio system. You want to demonstrate some application at CES or any other game event or something. Then you might need a bespoke application made that will just demonstrate your product. So we'll do stuff like that. And those ones, it doesn't really care about optimization. It's more about deadlines. You'll get a rushed thing saying, we decided to launch this at this event. We need it in 2 months. Can you do it? That's a question of, well, do you know what you want? No, you'll figure it out. And so we end up having to have the first
That's
3
the
weeks
worst.
spent figuring out like what would be a good product for this event or whatever.
Yeah.
And it usually works out okay. So that's the other kind. And then last but not least, it's more practical product things. So I've done work, for example, for aeroplane manufacturers. They want a really cool demo, they can take to trade shows and say, hey, look, all these other people are trying to sell you their fleet of airplanes. Our one has a really cool AR demo where you can physically drive and use the different parts of the plane and actually walk down it and all this sort of stuff and get a sense of the actual headroom and how big the bins are and stuff. Which the other companies are trying to show people by holding up a spreadsheet or something. And it's like, it may seem like a silly thing for a company to drop 12 to 50 grand on some demo like that, but from them, they're selling millions worth of airplanes. So for them to have a flashy demo they can bring to a trade show can often be the clincher that sells the difference between the two. So with all that said, there's a wide variety of stuff you do if you're doing sort of Unity contracting, and it's very rarely just games. So actually, I could go on forever about this, but like the last one I'll give an example of is I do a lot of museum installations and stuff too.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, so say you're doing those really cool touchscreen demos where you can welcome to Rome, and you can sort of see flying demos of going through different buildings and sliding something to see whether it changes between 2 different building types. Or I've even done presentations, companies who want to just do this is how our system works compared to competitors.
That's a really fancy presentation.
yeah, like it's a rare case, but if someone's trying to get a license to be the provider of an entire software security stack or something, they might want to show off going, here's how we encrypt our data and it flies through all these different things. And it's, hey, I'm just,
it works, man.
Right?
Blind them with science.
It's my job to make it, not to ask questions. And, so that is the very hard to describe job that I've found myself in. And from time to time, I will also do consulting and contracting, where I will kind of come onto a team, suggest architecture to avoid very real problems we've just described earlier. So
yeah.
There's your long answer to the question.
Was that $5 worth? I think it was. Yeah, I've always thought that what you do is pretty cool because it allows you to, use Unity, but you don't get bogged down in one large project like an MMO. No, I'm not gonna talk shit about MMOs. I promised myself I wouldn't. Yeah, you don't get bogged down in one project. You really get to experience a lot of different varieties and genres almost of almost like vertical slices. That
it is really cool. Yeah, like sometimes you'll get a problem you've never heard of before, and like I got one I can't talk about too much, but let's say there's a machine with a giant rotating arm, and I had to control that from another side of the world using a VR controller by waggling my hand.
That's awesome.
And I was like, what the hell am I guess UDP, get back at data and figure it out. And then it's, it ends up being like 2 weeks of me sort of scratching my head trying to figure out how to do it. And then the dramatic feeling of success when you end up like watching someone Skype you and point point the camera at this arm, and then you're
And
holding
you're
this thing
moving.
and go, and it's like, this is so cool. It's like just one of those things, you know?
That's cool. That's really cool. It's way cooler than my day job. I won't even
To
tell
be
you about
fair, I
it.
also do from time to time .NET Core APIs. I do AWS,
Mm,
Azure stuff. So don't undersell the backend stuff. There's a lot of fun situations where I've had a client come to us and they've said they've picked us because I knew how to do the mean stack stuff
mm,
that could interact with theirs, or I was able to suggest how they should optimize their, using gzip for their RESTful API to slow down to close the packet sizes for large data sets or whatever.
yeah.
It's like sometimes you'll get a job that seems like a game job, and you'll have this knowledge of experience from stuff you've done on enterprise level software, and go,
Yeah.
I can apply that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Especially APIs. I mean, those are so big these days, used for so many things.
Oh, here's another one off the top of my head. I
Mm.
worked on one project where somebody wanted to open up a VR application, and it would say, "Hello, Martin from company blank." And it's like, well, how do we get that information? Well, they're at a trade show and someone's walking up, and there's someone like a booth person who sets them up in the headset.
You
And
scan
they
their
wanted,
badge or something.
well, yeah, so they wanted a way of doing that. Now, the kind of lo-fi version of that is that they could like just get the information off them before they jump into the experience, but they wanted a way of updating it in the experience without
Hmm.
having access to like literally editing in the app or doing anything too particularly complicated. So I built a separate app. It was just a standard WPF application that lets you type in the information,
Mm.
it would log it, list all of the people, the dates and times they tried it, including their email address, and then when you press save, it would save a text file, and then I'd use a folder reader to read the changes to that file and then update the information in the VR app relative to the most recent person that logged in. So that's like a completely .NET application designed to edit a text file, and the text file reading became an element of the VR application. And the point of that was that when they were done, they could say, distribute your experience information to each person afterwards from the event. So that was one of those things where it's like, that's a non-Unity problem to solve. I'm sure you could have done it with Unity dialogues and pop-ups, but
Yeah.
kind of in earlier days of VR, it was a lot harder to have these sort of, one version on your screen versus the version that was on the headset. So
Right.
yeah, sometimes the network stuff and the standard software as a service stuff will come in handy,
Yeah, well, that brings up a really important point that we've talked about plenty of times before, and that is tooling for your games. And what you're talking about there with that VR experience where you wanted to display the name, you had to write some sort of tooling to facilitate that. And I think that's something that a lot of maybe new game developers don't really consider when they're working on some game. Maybe it's a platformer or an RPG. You take for granted that you can just kind of set up, for instance, your level in the Unity editor with dragging stuff into your scene, but maybe as your game progresses, that level has certain rules that can easily be broken by just dragging stuff into the scene. So then you make a level editor that is completely outside of the game. It's just literally a tool, and that tool could just be a .NET application, WPF application that writes to a text file or a JSON file that your game can read in and use to build the level on start. So I mean, that's just one example, but tooling is such an important thing, something that I've actually really wanted to cover on the channel. Shoot, man.
And I've done that too. Like I've done a very simple version where you just render a grid into a WinForms application.
Yeah.
Based on where you click, you put textures, and then you spit out a text file that's 0-1-1-0, and for each column in a row, and you read it in, and it just generates a 3D map relative to it. Very quick way to give somebody a way of generating their own data without having to worry too much about opening Unity or even installing Unity, right? It can just be a single .NET application.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes that's a much easier approach.
And what's interesting? I think tooling is much like writing tests for your game, in that when you write your game to be testable or your code to be testable, it's easier to test, but not just from a low level standpoint, but your classes are designed to allow for injection, so you can easily put like dummy classes, things that you can like use to test in the editor much easier, like editor specific classes that are designed just for development, like setting up a scene for development. But same thing with writing tools. When you have to write a tool for your game, that means you have to sort of think about, how do I separate the setting up this particular feature or game mechanic in a way that information can be fed into it. And that way, it really makes for code that's more flexible, and also code that's easier to test and to work with in development. Because, I mean, sometimes you just want to test a particular feature, and if you have this game that is completely inflexible and totally coupled, then it is just your game. But if you've written in a way that it's open for testing and tooling, then you can sort of manipulate it to be in a certain state for a particular test much easier, because all those classes and all those systems and features are designed to sort of be kind of like plug and play, or like little toys in a toy box that you kind of put together.
Plus a feature extension too, right? Like, for example, you could
True.
build a level, or you could build a level reader, which doesn't have to be the most complicated thing in the world. It can literally be read a 2D array and then generate geometry from it. And with the intent of hard coding it every time, like, you're not going any further than that to start. And then later on, you can save out the files. All of a sudden, it's much easier to save levels than it was before. And then you can go one step further. You can read in levels, and you can have user-created content, which wasn't an original feature, but now is an easy thing to implement. And you can go one step further and say, hey, maybe I'll make a version of my game which is infinite generated levels.
Yeah.
You didn't plan for that, but now all you have to do is build a new generator that spits new files out and then saves them and loads them in. So you're allowing yourself to extend things just by making your life easier. And probably that's all of that is an aside from the fact that if you do use tooling, the whole point of it is to make life easier to generate content. And most games live and die on the amount of content they have.
Yeah.
So, like, literally, you can make a tool, hand it to somebody, and say, and make loads of cool weapons and guns and swords and stuff. And you don't need me to do it. Just do it and drop it in, and the code will generate it for us.
Especially MMOs. I gotta say it, man. Live and die by content.
But another thing too, a lot of people think that when we're talking about tooling, we're talking constantly about some external .NET application or external website or something.
Not necessarily.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah. You can do tooling inside of Unity. Common example being, if you've got I had a cool little side menu I did where we had scenes in the application that were structured by episodes. It was an episodic thing, and the way we did it is we read all of the files that were scenes from the active scenes in build, and we generated a drop-down menu at the top of Unity that would let us jump to the right scenes based on chapters. Other stuff we've done in the past is you can do pre-processors for your assets. So say, for example, you've made your own localization system. The idea is that you're reading in all of your audio files and you're building scriptable objects that contain the audio file, a certain name based on some language, English audio, the Chinese audio, the whatever else. What you can do is you can build a processor that will read each file when it does a build step, when you drop it in, and then do something to it. So, for example, we built a system where, as long as we named the audio file, the sequence _en_ch or whatever, just by dropping it into the project, it would look for the scriptable object that it needed to exist. If it didn't, it would make it. And once it made it, it would add to the array position for that object reference to the particular language type it was, and reference the character code. So you drop in a file, wouldn't do anything else. And in your system, if you change the language to CH, all the calls to get audio clips would pass in the CH. It would find the appropriate audio file and do it for you. All of this done in terms of just, creating one script one time. And think of how much work that would be. It's all tiny amounts of work.
Yeah.
But if you had to open up a scriptable object, name it based on the new audio file, drag in the one for the Chinese language thing, you decided to add a new language, drop it in, find it in hierarchy, drop it out. It's all this little work that adds. The more of this stuff you can automate, the more tooling you can do. And it can be in Unity as opposed to some third-party giant system.
Yeah. And the great thing is that all of that, especially when it's in Unity, you can push it to the repository. And if you have other folks on your team, you just say, hey, look, pull the project, open up this tool, and do whatever you need to do. And it's good. I mean, I guess speaking from the perspective of an indie game developer, you need to be able to pull other people into the project to help you at later stages where it becomes less of trying to build your game and more of, okay, it's built. Now I need to fill it with content. In the instance of like a platformer, you might spend the first phase of building this platformer, designing the mechanics, the key mechanics that differentiate your platformer from others. Maybe you've defined the art style and you have all your assets ready to go with music and sound. But then eventually you're just going to have to spend a huge portion of your time making levels, filling out dialogue trees, trying to determine how boss fights and boss mechanics are laid out. And if you've laid the groundwork and created the tools that facilitate creating that content, then it's very easy to offload that to other people, other talented people who could come up with really great levels. And then I think I also saw mentioned up here in the chat that if you don't want to make an MMO or a multiplayer game, the next best thing, that's just one way to look at it. The next best thing is to have player created content. And so if you have something like Mario Level Maker, something akin to that in your game, then you open it up to the whole community who plays your game. It could be a single player game, but then they could go ahead, use your tools that you've exposed now to the public to make levels, and now you have a whole community around your game. So just a lot of it's very open to the possibilities that are available when you actually start adding tooling to your game. So definitely an important thing. Definitely want to make a video about that.
Yeah, actually, that'd
be a great topic
idea for a video right there.
Yeah, write that down.
The other one too is a lot of people who are gamers themselves are a bit skittish about the idea of being very generated with their content. So obviously we're saying tooling doesn't necessitate having to do procedural generation. They're not the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can use the tooling just in-house to make content for your game. But it is worth noting too that you can actually, if you want to, you can use the procedural generation first, then edit it yourself in runtime or before you make the build. So a lot of people think about procedural generation as, oh, I must have a dungeon where the maze is unique it's randomly generated every time and it's not very satisfying, and why would I bother completing it? Well, you as a content creator can use in your build before you even made the game a generator to generate loads of mazes, play them, find the fun ones, move some walls around, change some stuff, and then save it. You don't have to ship the procedural generator. You can use the procedural generator to just cut out a large portion of work that would be you trying to tease out what's a good shape for design. So oftentimes if you're playtesting and trying to find something that's fun, you can just create a bunch of randomizers, play with it, find the ones that work, and give yourself a special button you can press on the keyboard that'll say write to a file or save to a scriptable object the current configuration of these settings. And now you've got, you can basically play your game to create levels for your game, and they'll give you ideas and stuff as you go through. So procedural generation doesn't have to be a villain in terms of making your game rote and boring. It can be something you use just as a way to sort of ease out the good parts of your gameplay,
Yeah, and another thing too about tooling is that sometimes you think of tooling and maybe you get, let me just speak from my perspective. Sometimes I look at tooling and I get really bogged down and I got to make it have a great UI, and it's gotta function very well and have all this error handling. Sometimes you just need to automate some process, like Jason was talking about earlier. And in those cases, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be even close to perfect. When you go to release it to the public, or if you try to bring other people onto your team, yeah, you should probably make sure that it doesn't corrupt your data, break your game, and throw a bunch of exceptions. But in the case of it's just something you're trying to make your life easier, I wouldn't, don't be like me and really harp on trying to make it perfect, because at the end of the day, as long as it provides value to you, that's really the best you can ask for. So
as long as you're enjoying either playing it or making it, one or the other.
Yeah, find the fun. Wanted to point out Black Panda Studios, great comment. Thank you. He says, I really enjoy these live streams. Just an awesome way to get through my morning commute. So just saying thanks. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. If you'd like to show your thanks, please hit that like button. Really appreciate it. It's always hard to say that. I always feel like I'm I don't know. But
that's
please.
Why you'll notice that a lot of people who do that, they always put on the announcer voice, because that way I feel less like a sellout. That's just how we do.
I think I just did that. I'm gonna play that back.
Yeah.
Hit that like button, and I will know that you're.
I'm sorry, I have to do this. This is just the way the algorithm works.
Definitely. So looks like we are 30 minutes into this. In about 15 minutes, I think we're gonna dive into a code review. But before we do that, I did notice a lot of chatter up at the top of this chat here about Zenject. I mix that up with Zendesk all the time. Zenject and dependency injection. So I feel like we should address it. We haven't really talked too much about Zenject, I don't think. Seems like a good topic. A lot of people want to discuss it. So for those of you who don't know what Zenject is, it's a dependency injection framework designed specifically for Unity. The guy who created it, Steve, I want to say his last name is Vermeulen, Steve Vermeulen. He's a really cool guy. I actually did an interview with him maybe over a year ago on the channel. He's the one who created it, and how he he contributes to his own project, and he's named it Xtenject. So I'll put a link if this is a highlight, and also in the description I will put a link to this. But basically, it's a great framework for dependency injection in Unity. Now, there is some discussion about whether or not you should use a dependency injection framework, and I think that's a lot about what people were talking about up here. I think one of the questions was why? Because we have said in the past, Jason, that we typically would not use something as heavy, I guess you could say, as Zenject. And so the question is why? Why don't we use it?
Do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So when I first learned about Zenject, it really felt like, when you learn about design patterns for the first time and you're like, oh, I've learned the Singleton pattern. Where can I use this? Yeah. MVC, where can I use this? Same thing with Zenject and dependency injection, which is a pattern. I think it's dependency inversion or inversion of control is the pattern. I'm not sure which one.
Oh, yeah. So let me give a cut in on this one.
Yeah.
So basically, you are... inversion of control is a design architectural decision, deciding. So when you've got A depends on B, there's an arrow that draws that line between A to B, and that is your dependency. Is the direction of dependency, and it's hard to describe unless you've worked in dynamic linked library type stuff where you're distributing things separately. But it basically boils down to, if I change this thing, will this thing have to change to make up for the changes to the other one? And if you have A depends on B, if B changes, A has to recompile, but B is fine because B is standalone. If A recompiles and changes, B is fine because B doesn't depend on A. And so you can kind of draw your application as a series of lines just to show you which way the dependencies are kind of in your application. So inversion of control is actively deciding, rather than having A depend on B, we'll create some interface. A will depend on the interface. B will implement the interface. Now, dependency is different. Now, only if the interface / A changes and B changes. So that's fundamentally swapping. So it comes down to the low-level thing is no longer dependent on the higher-level thing as opposed to the other way around. A good example of this is if you had a character and you injected some behavior into it, or for every new character, you can reuse the same behavior, but it doesn't work if there was a behavior inside of it. It's hard to... We'll probably do a code example of this. It's much cleaner to explain it as an actual thing. Yeah. But the TLDR of all of this is inversion of control is the principle behind what you're doing. And you can use inversion of control just by taking dependencies out and putting them into a constructor or using a strategy pattern or something. It's when you take out a thing inside of it and then inject it in some fashion. That's sort of the way you do it. As for BI, which is a term you've heard, representing dependency injection, that is a way in which you fulfill those requirements for inversion of control. So inversion of control lets you separate out and change the direction of the dependencies. And then dependency injection is where you inject dependencies into your system. The difference being, if you don't use dependency injection, you have to say new thing, which has a new thing in it, which has another new thing in it, which has another new thing. And you're manually building that tree of what represents each dependency into each other. If you use a dependency injection framework, you say, these are all the dependencies, and figure it out. If this needs a this, fill it in. If that needs a that, fill that in. And you just sort of let the dependency injection root compose your application for you. So that's the difference. Inversion of control is the principle. Dependency injection frameworks are the things that actually do it to save you the automated process. If you design in an IOC manner, you can always apply DI to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, a good example of IOC is serialized fields. You are injecting those dependencies by using the Unity editor. I mean, it's pretty much one way to do it. There's plenty of other ways to do it. I have a video on it. Should also probably link that in this description. But so basically, getting back to what I was saying, thank you for the description. I learned all that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to use this everywhere. And instead of thinking, well, I want to learn about I want to use inversion of control to make my life easier, it just became a matter of, well, how can I use Zenject to everywhere? And, Zenject is great because you really can get a lot of control over your dependencies. And it really is a nice standardized way to handle dependency injection. And theoretically, if enough people know about Zenject, then it does ease in the process of bringing someone else onto a project, because you can say, oh, do you know about Zenject? You do. I'm using Zenject. And right there, they know exactly how you are passing around your dependencies. That being said, for simple projects to medium-sized projects, I would argue that you're probably better off just handling your own dependencies, because Zenject does add a lot of extra features that oftentimes can bog you down. And then another thing with that is that because Zenject relies on attributes like the inject attribute, and some of its features like pooling, which aren't necessarily related to inversion control, but it somehow works itself in, those features really can couple themselves to your code in a way that eventually you get to a point where you couldn't even remove Zenject if you wanted to. And that is
Vendor lock-in, yeah, it can be a problem.
that becomes a problem. So generally speaking, unless it's a really big project and I really need some tight control over my dependency injection because I just can't handle it, that's where I'd use Zenject. But otherwise, I generally prefer nowadays to just try to manage it myself.
Yeah, so I think pretty much exactly what you said. The kind of summary version for me would be, we discussed before, you ain't gonna need it, and dependency injection is designed as a way of automatically fulfilling large trees of dependency kind of requirements. So if you've got an A which requires a B, and a C which requires an A which requires a C, and all of a sudden you're getting to this sort of nested cascading concept, that is a very good case for dependency injection frameworks. If you can manage it by building a couple of builders and factories, you can probably get away without it. It may seem like we're trying to avoid adding it, but better way I'd phrase it is, like I said, you can design your code in an inversion of control method that will allow you to test and do your code and build your components yourself, and everything works fine. And you can always add the dependency injection whenever it gets to the point where managing the, the injecting yourself starts to become too big of a project to handle. And I've found more often than not, it doesn't get that far. Now, if you're building a giant game, sure, but it is worth noting that a dependency injection framework is usually the root of your application. It is
Yeah.
literally the thing that composes, builds, and runs your app. A good example of this is if you use .NET Core, where you're building a web API, or hell, if you're using something like Angular and you're building some sort of Express.js, web API, building on a node build or something. It doesn't matter what you're doing. A lot of these systems tend to have a backend that basically is some form of inversion of control. It is building your dependencies, composing and injecting them. And that tends to be the root that your application is built on. So in an API sense, you are composing all of your dependencies in one place, build your controllers, you use them. But the thing is, Unity has an engine called Unity. It is an engine, right? The whole point of Unity as we have it is it's using a component model, and a component model is a way to handle dependencies. It is literally composing things as a suite of components, stacking their usages and using them as a tree structure. So not the dependency injection is wrong. It's just that if your application is so complicated that you're using dependency injection for it in a game context, you could have probably gotten there by using the systems Unity provides for you. I'm not saying Unity has everything built in, but it is designed to build scalable large games. Kinds of problems where dependency injection is fit for is usually an application that doesn't have all of that stuff and all of that architecture in place for you. So I have used it. Mostly I've used it in things which are very service oriented. If you've got an application where you're sending data to multiple sources, you're building for multiple platforms, you've got multiple providers of data, or you're connecting to multiple APIs, then you might want to build configuration sets, right? So this is the configuration to load for Android. This is the configuration to load for, devices on PC or whatever else. There might be a case for it, but even then, I find I would rather spend a minute or two writing in a new dependency into a config file than I would adding an entire library just for the sake of doing it. And then, as Charles said, you're putting inject headers in all of your scripts. And if someone says, hey, can you pass me on that script you have in your project? And you give it to them, and they go, oh, I can't use this. I need to have a framework installed. You're like, okay, well, remove the thing, make it public, give yourself a constructor. Like all of a sudden, they have to rewrite all of your script just to handle that support. So I would only use it if the application has grown to the point where I can now add it and it will start saving me time isn't much of an issue most of the time, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you're going to use a dependency injection framework, Extenject is definitely the way to go. It's really well written. It's been optimized. Again, Steve Vermillion, the guy who created it, he's a very smart guy, and I have total faith in in that asset. But yeah, just one of those things that you don't want to put the cart before the horse, like I did, because I was trying to find every need. I was trying to shoehorn it into every project I ever used. And that's just, one of those things where I'm speaking from experience. As you mature as a developer, you try to just make do and write what you need. And Yagni seems to be a theme of this stream so far. We've said it a couple times.
Yeah, it kind of has been, right?
Yeah, right. Yagni, title that the stream. If you don't need it, don't put it in. And if that means the first time you need to inject some sort of dependency, or you feel the need to do that, is not the time to say, all right, let's install Zenject.
It's the time you're sitting there and going, oh my God, 20% of my work time is spent building components and doing stuff. It's the same for tooling, right?
That's the time.
When something starts becoming more work to manage and configure than it is to write, that's when you might start asking yourself, is there value in doing it? I will say though, if you get to that stage, Zenject is a good solution, because if you ever tried to write your own dependency injection framework, you can actually do it in probably 200 lines. It's not that complicated to write a very, very basic one.
There's a great article that you could follow through, and you can write your own one pretty easily.
But what you'll start to figure out is, because it uses the activator, and it basically it does an awful lot of interesting stuff with casting and figuring out what types are necessary and managing scopes. You can write one that'll work, but it won't work the way you expect it to. So a lot of very clever work has been done to get these dependency injections to work the way they do. So if you do need one, go to the people who've been doing a lot and making them work very well. It's just ask yourself if you've gotten to the stage where you actually need it,
Yeah. So I think Black Panda Studios summed it up, and then we can move on to the code review. And he says, basically, every pattern has its pros and cons, and none of them are the solution to all problems.
So remember, if you're holding a hammer, not everything is a nail, even if it looks like it,
Yeah. And I would say don't even go to the toolbox until you really have figured out that, you can't pull that nail out with your hands, or whatever the analogy is, just try to do it. And then if you can't do it, or if it gets too complicated or busy, try to find a tool or a design pattern. I know that's easier said than done. I think we should point that out. It's design patterns are, I guess, sorry for the, I can't think of a better term. They're abused because they provide so much hope, and they are so simple. They really do encapsulate these problems that we come up against, and you look at them and you say, wow, a design pattern. This sounds like exactly the problem I was having. But you really can't overuse them if you think that way. Sure, it's good to know them all, but you should try to take care of it yourself. And if you need it, apply the design pattern where needed. It's rough. It's a hard one. Yeah. So code review.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna let you start. I'm gonna be back in 1 second. So
sure.
Fire away without me.
Yeah. We'll play through it. Okay. So while he does that, let's take a look at the code review. So today's code review is provided by Sean244. That's his name on GitHub. I apologize, Sean, if you have a Discord name on the server. Just leave it in a comment and I'll drop it in the description of the video. Let's swap over to my desktop view. So the code, well, actually, really, this is just a whole project. This is the Oregon Trail hunting. So it looks like he's created his own version of the Oregon Trail in Unity. So this is just the GitHub page. Why don't we hop on over into Unity and play through it. Now, in the last stream, we talked about sending in full projects for the code review. And I had asked, hey, what's up, Sparrowhawk? Thanks for joining us. So I had asked that, if you're going to provide a full project, that you just leave a note of where to look at. So sort of backtracking on what we said in the last stream, today we're just going to take a look. This is a full project. Sean hasn't really given us any sort of direction of where to look, we're gonna just hop into some of the classes and see if we can find anything to refactor. So first, let's just take a look at playing it. As we can see here, hit the play button. Hey, Sean, that's your code? Sean Carey, man. That's awesome. Cool. Thank you. Sean Carey is the one who provided this code. Thank you for providing this. This is a really cool project. I actually had a lot of fun playing it. I used to play Oregon Trail in elementary school. Man, I would spend so many hours. We go to the computer lab after school and just play this with some friends. That and some Carmen Sandiego. Not sure if you've played that one. I'm going to disable the sound here. But yeah, so again, this is kind of like an Oregon Trail port, the portion of the game where you actually hunt. I don't know if you've ever played Oregon Trail, but so when you start the game, you can do some settings here. I'm going to disable the sound, and we're just going to show the statistics so you can just see how terrible of a shot that I am. Hey, Jason, looks like you're back. How's it going?
Back indeed, yeah. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Yeah,
oh, man, great game.
Yeah, good game.
Great game. All right, so these 5 levels up here, not the Doom one, are pretty standard Oregon Trail levels. Great, so true to the original. So let's just choose one here. So you just come in here and you can shoot these animals for food, of course. You know, PETA, don't come at me. We'll just shoot this deer, and what we're doing here is we're killing the, oh my gosh, Math Blaster. I just saw that in the chat. I love Math Blaster. What a great game. Oh man, I want to download that one again. Wow, look at that. What a great shot I am. So yeah, kill some animals and the hunt.
You said what a great shot. You deserve that.
I know,
missed
right?
one the minute you said it.
So 60% accuracy, really great implementation. And I got to hand it to you. I really enjoy that there's a Doom level that you can use this machine gun to shoot down these bears and deers. Also, just to note the volume. If I were to put the sound on, you hear the Gatling gun shooting. It's pretty cool. Another really cool thing I liked about this, Sean, just from a user perspective, I like that you can take the mouse out and then you actually get the mouse. But when you move into the context of the gun, you snap to this Gatling gun. I think that's a very good implementation. Really good stuff there. Well, from a user perspective, I don't know how the code looks just yet.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, we'll get to that, I guess. It's a cool. Actually, most people don't realize you can do that with Unity. It's a very simple line. You can actually turn on or off the cursor or set it to various different values and stuff. It's great.
Yeah, Sean says I can lower the scale to 1 in order to get rid of that pixelation. Yeah, it just doesn't look as good on stream though. All right, so that's the game. Very cool stuff. Thank you, Sean. I don't know, Jason, you were stepped away, but Sean Carey, he popped up in chat. This is his code, so thank you to him.
Cool. Thanks for letting us look at your code. Let's hope we're not too harsh.
Let's rip it to shreds now. No, just kidding. So looking at GitHub, I know that Jason and I tried purposefully not to really dive into the code too much, although it is nice to always have notes. But one of the things we first mentioned to each other was we really liked how you organized the project. And I think that's something that both Jason and I have discussed in recent past together, that we would like to sort of share content about how to structure your projects, because that's really important. As we can see here, and I'm sure Jason has some thoughts here, we can see that we've got animations, audio, prefab, scenes. And then when you look into the scripts folder, even that is organized very nicely so that you've got the UI separated. He's got weapons, managers, and design patterns. That was an interesting one.
Yeah, we're a bit confused going, what's in the design patterns?
What is that? Yeah. So just, that was like kind of the first critique, not critique or thought. I don't know. You have any other thoughts on that before we jump into the code?
No, I'd just say that it's worth noting there's sort of 2 schools of thought on building systems like this for structuring your folders. You can either structure by content type, or you can structure by feature type. Now, it's worth noting for most normal projects, the instinct is to say, I'll put the scripts with the scripts, I'll put the textures with the textures, and it all makes sense to kind of store it that way. I will say, when you're working with Unity, though, it's worth keeping in mind, Unity isn't a file system. Now, it looks like a file system. You can look at the project directory, and it feels like a file system, but it's got an entire searching solution. You can search, you can use tags, you can basically go through it and find things. So realistically, if you want to find a texture with a certain name, you can literally type the name, type the type, and and it'll show up immediately, right? There's no need to sort of keep that logical connection between the folder of the type of thing it is and the thing it is. It keeps it tidy, but it doesn't give you more information or more features to search by. But you can't search by conceptual feature. So if you have something like a fire sword, and there might be 4 concepts associated with it: the sound for it, the texture for it, and the scripts that run it, and the prefab for it. Sometimes it might be easier. You'd want to look at all of the fire sword stuff in one place. Hypothetically, you might want to move it, delete it, you want to copy it. So you can type fire sword, but you're going to end up getting everything with fire in it. You're going to go through all the code. But even then, it's hard to find which of all of these things with fire in the title or whatever are the one I'm looking for or whatever else. And again, naming correctly helps, but my point is,
can't depend on that.
It's harder to conceptually control stuff like that. Now, there are tags. In the bottom right corner, Unity allows you to tag assets. You can group them relative to each other, and that's pretty good for parental categories. It's a bit harder for things that are on discrete, I call them feature level. So I guess my summary is you can either group things by type, which works. This is a really good system for managing a project of this scale. But if the project starts to scale up too large, usually a good idea to start thinking about putting things in groups by feature type. So put the enemies together and the orcs together, and the boss orc and whatever else, and his stuff is all in one directory for his stuff. Because what tends to happen in big projects, in a practical sense, is someone will say, we're annexing the boss orc. He's not a feature anymore. We're adding the laser dragon. So you want to be able to delete the orc stuff and add a laser dragon stuff. And having to go on a hunt through your application to find all of the associated assets can be a bit of a pain. So as things start to scale up, maybe think about putting things in groups relative to what it is, not what type of content each file is,
Yeah, it's a good point because if you're like me, and most developers probably come up against that. You think, how do I structure this? Is it features or is it type? And typically, I try to go feature. But yeah, I mean, there's feature type is another option.
It's a scale thing, right? Like for this size of a project, this is far better. Like if you'd gone down a rabbit hole of building a bunch of feature systems for this, that would be even worse. I'm just saying that this is an option as projects start to scale up.
Yeah. Like for instance, he could have come in here on the weapons and try to make folders based on weapon type, but I think for this scale, this is the appropriate approach here. So cool. So your folders are great. Well, actually, before we dive into the code, I can see Vakarol mentioned that he usually does a game folder where he puts all of these folders as subfolders to that. And Jason actually taught me one thing, or demonstrated one thing that I use. And I usually use a folder. I have a folder called _project, and then that's where I place all my scripts and animations and materials. And obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but the reason that we would do that is because Unity, when you pull in assets, now with the package manager, it's much better. But before you pull in for example, Zenject as an asset, it would pull in under Zenject. And now you just have this Zenject folder. And any one of those 3D model packs that we all purchase, you pull them in and each one of them has its own folder. And it's just why can't they just put it under an assets folder or like a plugin folder?
I don't know whether this was just my imagination, a very shrewd asset developer, or a new feature for the new version of Unity. But the last Unity project I built, all of the assets dropped themselves into a third-party assets folder. And I was ecstatic. That was like, this is great.
That is great.
They're no longer flooding up the root directory, so I can tell the difference between code I've written and assets I've added versus third-party assets I've included. So I think combine that with the package manager stuff, that could be less of a problem going forward. But the general principle being what Prav was saying was that you want to make a very clear distinction between your code and code you're using.
Yeah.
Because other stuff can get updated and changed and imported, and you want to kind of draw a line about the stuff that's yours or related to this project. But you might need to do that going forward. Who knows?
All right. So I think we've gushed over this folder directory enough. Let's take a look at some code.
Yeah, let's actually look at some code, I guess. Yeah.
All right. So just kind of looking at the scripts folder here in Writer. You've got your managers, so I think that's a pretty safe place to start. I see game manager. That looks like pretty key indicator. So what do we have here? Well, I'll say something right off the bat. Sean, just want to say this: everything we say thus forward from a place of love and growth and mentorship.
Uh-oh, Charles is about to drop the hammer.
I
Uh-oh.
really don't like comma separating variable declarations like this. What are your? I never heard your thoughts on this, Jason. What do you think? I'm not a fan of it.
It's more of a count thing, right? Like if I've got 3 flags, I might do it, but this many objects, probably not.
Maybe primitive types I could see that are related, like an XY. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah. So I don't know. That's just my personal. I'm interested too. Wow, it's interesting. I see what's happening here. You have all these serialized fields, and the attribute
I
applies
guess
to
you don't
all of
want to
them.
add, yeah, you don't want to add all of the individual ones. That's probably, you know, I
But
don't know. Again, it wouldn't call it any. It's like it's not a code spell or anything. Like it's more of a
no, it's a preference thing.
yeah. So I'd say that's probably fine.
Although maybe you're suppressing. Well, I guess for me, you're definitely not suppressing because I looked at that and I was like, oh, wow. But maybe you're suppressing a code smell where maybe you have too many serialized fields. Maybe having so many serialized fields is an indication that you could put that into maybe a scriptable object.
Well, that's actually that is one where you beat me to it. That's one I was going to say is if you do have that many individual fields like that, I would realize that there is a number of settings or configurations that are relevant. And could I divide this up into domains? So stuff to do with the gun, stuff to do with the spawning, stuff to do with the level stuff. And I would then possibly turn those into scriptable objects, and then I could move them around and configure them separately. Because again, like we talked about it before, but the word is collaborator, and that basically means person you are working with. And imagine you're like a some sort of a secret organization, right? You want to keep knowledge to a minimum. You want to keep every individual silo working and doing its job and knowing exactly how to do its job. And with a system like this, you don't think about it that way, but each one of these things is another piece of information that's talking to your system. Now, I know Game Manager is like a big master system, so there's sort of a you're tempted to add a bunch of stuff to manage everything all in one go, but it kind of helps if you conceptualize it as domains, right? And even without all of this stuff, very clearly there is level stuff, spawning stuff, and gun stuff. They are 3 separate things, and this could reference 3 collaborators instead of however many there are there, 7 or so, you know.
Yeah. Sparrow wants to know what happens if I change the name of one of them, because Ryder will say, oh, do you want to put formally serialized as? I'm curious.
It'll put the serialized as above it, but I think it'll probably automatically split it for you.
Let me pick one in the middle here. Let's see. What's the keyword? Is it F6? Nope. Yeah, there it is. I'm trying to learn my shortcuts here. We talked about this in the last one. So I'm just going to name it. I'm going to rename it Air Spawner without the underscore. Again, another preference that I've picked up personally because of Ryder. I actually don't serialized fields. I don't put an underscore in front of them, because I do view them as separate from private member variables, because they are actually exposed in some way. And for that reason, I view underscore, the name of the variable in camel case, to be reserved for private member variables that are not exposed in any way. So I'll just rename this to follow that. So
that is a good point. I've just conceded that's a you know, I'm in Unity's house now. I have to play by Unity's rules.
Yeah, so that's like, my compromise.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you think about it, private member variables underscore, like they're private. They are not accessible in any way, shape, or form. So that's been my sort of yeah. So it looks like it literally
I kind of cheat. I use it as a 2-parter, right? Like I'll use the serialized field, give me access to edit the value, and then I will use an onValidate function to treat it like combined. They make a single setter property. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
kind of a weird way of doing it, but it kind of gets around the Unity limitation.
Yeah, I got you. I don't like what this did. I literally cut it in half, like, because I picked one in the middle. So what I'm going to do is just undo all of this, and I'm going to use Ryder which is my code editor, just in case no one is familiar with Ryder. I'm going to go ahead and split into separate decorations. I'm going to grab all these with my cursor, and then I'm just going to apply some formatting, code style. I'm going to do Control-Alt-L to do that. And then for each one, based on what I just said, I'm going to rename these. So, I don't want to add I don't like to do the whole previously serialized as thing or formally.
Well, obviously, if you only need that,
I don't like that.
If you're going to change it, what I do if I have to do that is I'll change it so it gives me the formally serialized as. I will then immediately stop editing. I will save it.
Yeah.
I will go over. I will let it change the reference, and I will come back, and then I will remove it. So I don't want it living in my code because obviously it kind of represents a comment, right? Like it's an out of date piece of information.
Yeah, I don't like that. Yeah, definitely. A comment as an attribute, totally. It feels weird. Well, it looks like Ryder is not letting me make the choice. I guess it saves my previous choice, so screw it. We're just gonna leave it. All right. So let's scroll on down there. Okay, let's see. What do we got? I know there's one thing we saw, but we'll go ahead.
I was gonna say that the time thing at the top is just like it's highlighted in yellow just for people who don't know. It's going to warn you anytime you try to do float.
Zoom in here.
Anytime you try to do float operations on and set and check with 0, because with floating point precision, it's probably not going to be 0. Now, in the case of delta time like this, it's probably going to set it to 0. That's kind of what you're doing, so it's okay. But just if anyone ever wonders what that is, it's literally telling you floats don't save. It's hard to. I don't want to go into the detail of how memory management works for it, but you're basically floats can be 0.000001.
Some super low number. Yeah.
And so comparing against 0 can often lead to odd scenarios. If
By
you're
the
not
way,
aware of
that super low number can be found technically by calling float.epsilon.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, or you can also do double.epsilon as if you're using doubles. That's just one way or another. What the heck, Ryder, dude? What are you doing?
There's also min and max values. So if you can do float.min and stuff, and there's other stuff like that.
Yeah, min value. I've always used epsilon because I feel like that is pretty pointed.
It looks cooler. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Represents the smallest positive single value that is greater than 0. Come on. Yeah. What does min value say then? It's non-positive. I think it's negative. I think min value would be the lowest negative value. So
yeah. So
there you go. In this particular situation, yeah, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. So Spare, what tolerance is basically saying if I said is A equal to B, and A is 1 and B is 0.9, the answer is false. If I gave it a tolerance of 0.1, I'm saying you're pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Now that's obviously a huge number. You don't want to use something that large. But when you're doing things like checking distance comparisons, so if you've got something and it's moving and it's got a velocity and it's hitting its point, depending on that velocity, you might overshoot or you might never hit the actual point. So sometimes it's a good idea to sort of say, when you get within X range of it, it pretty much counts as true.
Yeah, especially with velocity, you might actually do something like 0.01 or 0.1 even, which is kind of high. But yeah, calling epsilon would be similar to calling something like that. Like such a stupid low number, but in memory, it's not gonna be exactly 0. So
and seeing as we're on that topic, just a warning for anybody out there. We've talked before about people who've come from .NET moving to Unity, but for people who are going from Unity and who move over to software as a service type systems, be very, very wary. Unity leans on floats specifically because they've got a much lower memory footprint for size, right? They're a lot smaller because you're allowing it to get fuzzy with some of the lower values. Double, on the other hand, is a double precision, so it's got considerably more memory taken up.
Yeah.
So be very careful. Never, under any circumstance, use float to represent money or anything that is important that's meant to go down to decimal values, because you will literally get off errors, and money will disappear, and that gets very, very dangerous. So keep in mind, float is being used in this context to represent something where it's good enough if it's close enough-ish. If you're using anything that's mathematically accurate, or you want to do something that leans more in that direction, you're going to want to use probably something like a double.
Now, I got a question for you, something that I've never really considered before. I would think... Wait, what is this equal greater than? It's a static. Oh, it's static. Okay, that's why. I was like, I would think that this would just get set. You just set it to false, but I didn't realize that it was it's a static. It's what do you call it? A getter. My bad. I was like, why don't I just set it to false? But I get it. It's a static variable. So you can check is game paused globally.
Sarah Hawk making a reference to Office Space. I don't know if anyone's seen that movie, but they basically start stealing all the rounding errors from the end of the very good movie.
That's awesome. A writer is telling me by graying out this accuracy that it is never used.
Yeah.
Well, it's technically used here.
Yeah, but the setter's not being used. That's the thing. If you look at the setter.
Oh, the setter's actually not being used. So, hey, Yagni, right?
No, the lambda expression. No, sorry, not you. Just look at the code. One of them is the lambda syntax for properties is a C#7 thing. No, that actually came in C#6.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
That's cool. Semantics.
Yeah. So there's method body. There's expression body members and method body members. That is an expression body member. That is a member.
Yeah, that's what this is.
Body member.
That's what it kind of threw me for a loop. I was like, "What is it equal?" It's like, yeah, it's an expression body. So basically, I saw that accuracy was not being used, and that's why I went ahead and got rid of it. Even though it is being called in the set, but the setter's not actually being used. So
I don't know. I'd leave it. I think we're getting pedantic with
zombie code. Well, zombie code is specifically commented out, so don't quote me on that. All right, we'll leave it there.
One thing I would say, this is just a general good practice. Like again, none of this is actually bad code at all. We're just entirely being pedantic with certain stuff. Yeah. For example, we talked about Singleton.
True that.
Yeah. And one of the things we have here is time.delta is an example of a Singleton reference property. That's being used in a few places here. In fact, it's being used to indicate whether the game is paused or not. Now, that can lead to issues later if you ever decide you want to play with the timescale. And that can come into place if you want to have the world pause for a second, but like the game is running. Like imagine someone's got a slow time ability. The rest of your code will go a bit weird because you've assumed time being 0 equals paused, right? So that's like the entire game is paused. So what I usually suggest, you take that concept out and you have some sort of time provider or some sort of time system. Now, it may seem like a silly thing to remove, but if you think about it, delta time represents the amount of difference between two frames of what happened effectively. And by default, delta time is a perfectly fine thing to use. But it's not as immutable as you might think, because there's fixed delta time that you use inside of fixed updates. There's unscaled delta time that you might want to use if you have a UI and you want to still have it paused, but also use animations that move inside of the paused UI. So time is not a single concept, right? It's like saying now in a game. It's a date, right? It's like what is now? Now can be whatever I want now to be. So rather than referencing the Singleton directly, where you now have to sort of, if you ever want to change that, you have to change it in 3 or 4 places, just like we discussed before, take that dependency out and invert the dependency with inversion of control by putting into this application or into this class a time system. And that time system tells you what time is and then lets you use it throughout the code.
Now, this is
a really good example of this. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, I was going to say this is a static variable, so I guess it would take a little bit more. Whatever this notion of is game paused is called, you almost want
even your own time Singleton, I suppose. Like it's not solving the problem.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Fair enough.
It's still isolating the problem. Yeah. The reason being is you can have a look at there's a really cool asset on the store called Chronos. It's variable time scalers. You can do cool stuff like have zones of pocket time with cool different things. That's basically all they're doing. They have a concept of watches and a concept of different clocks you subscribe to with different time scales, and you can do other cool stuff. If the game is paused, delta time returns 0. There's unscaled delta time if you want to know the delta time, even though delta time is 0. So there's different things. So you can set time scale and it'll match to the scaled time, or you can have unscaled, which is the normal delta time. And then again, there's fixed delta time, which represents the frame difference between physics steps. So that's usually 0.2 or 0.0.
Right. Okay, that's good. That's a good thought. Yeah. So this line could use some maybe design discussion or workshopping, but at least for now. And again,
yank or need is another thing. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
This is more of a just be aware that I'm very careful with pausing. Pause specifically is one of those things you don't want to tie to timescale, because pausing and timescale can lead you in really weird scenarios where your game doesn't work the way you expect it to when you pause, or other stuff goes wrong. So just keep in mind time and pausing are not the same thing.
Yeah. We should be more explicit about it instead of being implicitly dependent on time. Okay, so moving down, again, we talked about accuracy, but I think, Jason made a good point. We're sitting here in our ivory towers able to look at this code, but we shouldn't be so pedantic about it. I'm seeing that I'm 3 times louder than you.
I just nudged up my volume a bit, so hopefully that'll that'll help.
Should you nudge your volume or should I lower mine? But whatever.
Ooh, good question. Yeah.
All right, here's an interesting one. Calling base.awake. That seems a little
Yeah, that means you have your own base class, I'm guessing, then a custom mono behavior base.
Let me see. Oh yeah, Singleton.
Oh,
Oh
it's
boy.
Singleton, right?
Nothing against singletons. We won't even go into it. We already did. We just put out a video about it. But yes, I see now. Singleton. I'm just gonna see what's going on here. Ah, okay. The awake. The awake. Interesting, because now that every class that inherits from singleton needs to know that it has to call the base, for better or for worse. What do you think? Is that something that's is that an acceptable assumption? That anyone who comes along and says, "Hey, I want a singleton," there's a singleton class. I'll just
Um, so this is one of
because if
those
you,
things, right? Is
yeah,
there's there is if we step out of Unity for a second, right? The concept of a singleton, if you can call a constructor on it, it isn't a singleton because the whole point is you can actually instantiate singletons. So a true singleton has a private constructor. So literally you have to access it via the singleton. Now
yeah,
this is unfortunately harder to do with Unity because you can't access constructors. It won't let you compose mono behavior objects like that. So this is like the mono behavior singleton thing. It's sort of a solution. It's a very common solution to this problem. You can even go one step further by having it be don't destroy, unload, and other kind of stuff like that. This effectively manages your awake cycle for a singleton. So this is a good solution to have a base class version of it, but it's sort of it's fine for Unity. But just keep in mind, if you ever try to have a singleton base class in non-Unity examples, you are breaking the fundamental principle of what a singleton is. Because in order
right.
to have a base class, you're probably going to be exposing how it works. So you have to make a private constructor, which leads to all sorts of other stuff.
This is basically how it gets around the private constructors. That it says, "Hey, you can make it, and I can't really make the constructor private. You can create as many as you want, but we'll destroy it. We'll destroy that game object." However, the only thing that stinks is that if I were to go ahead and have game manager and I forget for whatever reason to call the base awake, well then now you have two objects in the scene and it doesn't do its job. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, just bring up a good point. This is, I know we're kind of like not really discussing this code, more in and around this code, but it's bringing up issues that we probably should mention. Another thing I see people do, and you know who you are, is a lot of people will create a base mono behavior of their own. And they will say, I don't want to write void awake or void on collision enter and stuff every time. I don't know what all the methods are. They will make a virtual version of each of them, and then they will override the ones they want. This has an unintended side effect, which is for every one of these magic functions you add into a mono behavior, Unity adds it to effectively a run list and will iterate and run them. So even if it's blank in the base class, having empty starts and empty awaits get added and get ran and cause some overhead. Now it's not much, it's not like it's the end of the world, but if you're building thousands of bullets and every bullet has a base bullet or base mono behavior, those empty methods will get called and will cause overhead. So just as a general practice, try not to just have virtual methods that are extending from Unity's pipes if you don't need them.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, I think this seems like a good opportunity to, before we move on to the next piece, to say, hey, if you haven't liked this video, be sure to like this video. Kristen, if you're editing this video, this is a good place to stop and start the new clip. And yeah, while you take a sip of your beer, I'll take a sip of I'll finish off my whiskey here. Let's move on down. What do we got? I know there was something. Oh, there it is. Select level. Wow.
Okay, yeah.
Definitely gets the job done.
And I've literally said I've done stuff like this before, but this is one of those things where this will eventually cause a panic, because keep in mind what this is saying is get my child's game object and set it active. So that is an example of law of Demeter in Unity terms.
Yeah. Which is interesting because, I mean, you're calling these methods on. So you call transform, then you call this method that has a return, and then based on that return, you call another method on that, and then you get the game object, and then you call another method on that game object, set active true. Definitely, look, I'm sure. I mean, the game runs great, and it seems to solve the problem, but I would even say for a project of your scale, I don't know. It
Might
seems
be
like
fine,
it might be fine.
Probably the only thing I would say is that if you were getting something by index or by name, you can also say get child and then have a string game object name.
Mm-hmm.
Or well, actually find, isn't it? It's not find then string game object name. They're fine. You can use either of those functions, but I would avoid using them in cases that aren't prefabs. If they're a prefab, you're sort of locked in the hierarchy structure for that object. If you're using it in a manager like this, somebody might just, copy this script, or you might give it to somebody and say, here, use this. And they'll say, oh, I don't need these other things underneath it. I'll delete it. And all of a sudden this code breaks. So you either should only really use this if it's going to be in a prefab, or do your null checks. Ensure the object exists when and where you expect it.
Yeah. So again, seems to work. And from going back to the first question that was asked, you look back at a project that needed refactoring. I'm sure Sean's watching this thinking like, ooh, maybe I should refactor this. But on the same note, it does the job. And since his project, I don't foresee it being iterated on past what he's already created. You could argue that this is fine. However, we're trying to educate here, and this breaks a couple rules, one being the law of Demeter. There's probably a better way to encapsulate this, or just inject this thing into the class. You already have 7 serialized fields. Why not add one?
Exactly, yeah, you've got a lot of dependencies already. Yeah.
You might as well just add one for that. So this is going to cause you a lot of headaches, 6 months down the line when you're like, well, let me go add another level. And maybe you switch things around. So yeah. And
as a general rule, like if you're doing child stuff, like keep in mind what you're basically saying is give this to somebody else to do. But realistically, you already have another requirement there, right? Like whatever that child object you're using is level components. Maybe you should have something called level component and tell it to turn itself on or off or something. Delay that to somebody else.
Absolutely.
Here's a fun one: the compare tag one. Actually.
I was literally going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say that next. The magic strings, which we covered last one.
But I will say, a lot of people don't realize this. You can say level.tag double equals something. He's actually 100% on the ball here. You should be using compare tag. Compare tag is considerably more performant.
Just to look at what that the alternative would be. It would be, what is it? Level.tag equals doom low. Hey, by the way, this is kind of an argument against what we're probably going to say with magic strings. Rider does have the ability to determine what the tags are and show them for you in IntelliSense. It's kind of nice. I don't know if that kind of puts an argument against our magic strings discussion, but what?
No.
Continue. Yeah, I know. Continue talking about compare tag. Let me not interrupt you.
No, I was just gonna say, it's like there's some stuff that I'm okay with an editor taking control of, but it comes down to how easy will someone else parse this code, right? And if you're using literal level names and someone decides, oh no, we're using this new syntax 1_ doom level 2_ whatever, suddenly your code breaks. That's very confusing. It's at least worth having. If you're going to use something like this for a comparison, at least put a constant at the top of the file. Yeah. So when it breaks, someone can go in and go, oh, that's the level name. I need to change it. Because you're mostly writing this for people to work with and edit it,
Yeah. Sean paid $5 to justify his object full script, which he says is static because it doesn't need to be instantiated. Thank you, Sean.
Well, let's hope you don't ever need to pull one set of objects and you don't need multiple objects.
All right, so we talked about magic strings, which is basically a magic string is this where you actually pass in some string that we've set up in the editor. Sure, it's great that Rider can determine this tag based on what's in Unity editor, but the idea would be it would be preferred. I wouldn't say we. Generally speaking, I think it'd be widely agreed that you should pump this into a constant string. So I'm just gonna see if Rider can help me do that. Can I put this in as a field? Can I say move? Let me undo this. Sorry.
One thing I will say as well, this is more of a philosophical thing on the code I'm looking at here. There's an awful lot of set actives, which obviously means you're using objects to represent chunks of the game that you're turning on or off. And that can be fine. I mean, that's the whole point of having objects. But that doesn't scale well. So once you start, especially if you're doing something with VR, it's kind of okay for most projects, but if you're doing something that needs to be hyper performant, again, people don't really think about this. The component model you're using is literally trees of objects, which have trees of objects, which have trees. It's children in this hierarchical tree. And you might think of it as, oh, for each component or for each transform or whatever, but they're all things that have logic and rules and stuff beneath them. So when you turn off an object, it, waterfalls down and turns off everything else underneath it, disables the mono behaviors, turns off the objects, does a load of stuff. And it's very easy to sort of just go, oh, that's just turning off some stuff. It's fine. But with the amount of stuff you turn on and off, as your project starts to scale, you'll notice you'll get hitches from that. You'll get a lot of problems with performance because it's actually not very performant to disable large tracks of objects. And then when you reactivate them, it has to call on enable again, run through all of the different scripts, call the on enables, run through them, start activate stuff again. So there's a lot of overhead in this conceptual idea of deactivating and reactivating objects. So if it's visual stuff, like if you want to turn off a renderer effectively, like you've got something that dies, sometimes it's just better to hide the renderer, right? And pause the execution of the code running. So I would usually make a function on the object and say hide. And what hide will do is it'll turn off the update loop call. It will just basically exit out on the first line of update and will turn off the renderer. And that will just instantly make the thing stop being there. But in the instance where you need to re-show it again, you don't have to reactivate a tree of objects. You can just flick it back on again. So basically, when it comes to a lot of objects, think of it in terms of, do I need to turn this on and off? Can I just hide it visually, and will that achieve roughly the same effect?
I also see an opportunity for encapsulation. I mean, if we look at what level's doing, level is a string. And I really feel like it could just be an object where Doom level could just be a subclass of some abstract level that you call hide on, or rather set inactive, or whatever you want to call it, or deactivate. And for the Doom level implementation, the Doom level will have access to a chain gun, will have access to the Doom ground spawner, and the Doom level to set inactive. And any of the other ones, the standard levels, if you will have, their rifle and their air spawner, etc. And they will be able to just they'll be able to handle what set inactive is to them. So instead of using a string,
it's basically a strategy, right? Like you handle it the normal way, or you handle it the Doom level way, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good. I don't really want to do that right now since we've got about 4 minutes left in the stream. But let's just muscle down to the bottom, see if there's anything here.
Yeah, I guess the summary here is like we don't want to get too pedantic with a lot of it, because we're kind of covering a lot of the same ground. And the question is, could this be extracted into more collaborators? Could it be simpler? Yes. Like you can kind of see it's doing 3 or 4 tasks. We could probably split this into, start level, whatever it is, Doom or otherwise, activate weapons, whatever they are, doesn't matter. And, manage spawning of objects, whatever they are, do it. And that would just cut all of this code down to like 3 or 4 lines of structured code. And then other systems will handle whatever it is that you need to do. That's about it. Like a lot of this stuff doesn't need to be extracted out yet. It's just as things get bigger, they might be. Like there's a line at the bottom, which is the level creation, and that's using the actual scene manager. And it's using the scene manager to load new scenes. That's fine. You can do it that way. But as the application scales, you're probably going to want to extract that out so you can fire events to do faders and wipe in things to make your scene transitions better. So just keep in mind, again, collaborators mean units of work that are being done by this script. Mm-hmm. And right now, this one script is doing like 6 jobs, and you can probably simplify it to do 2 or 3.
Yeah. I'm just brought the object pool because I saw some discussion about it. Sean, thank you for the super chats. Wanted to be clear that the object pool is not a mono behavior. So I just wanted to bring that up so everyone can see what it looks like. I'm going to scroll very slowly. So if you're watching this later, you can take a look at his code, or I'll link the GitHub account as well, or the GitHub page. So, yeah. All right. So a lot of great points here. Again, Sean, I think just to wrap up this code review, we only looked at your game manager, but really a lot of great practices. Oh, I just noticed something. I don't like summaries. But mentioned again, the whole point of this is not to be pedantic. Sean, another super chat. Can we do a part 2 on this for next time? He really wants to look at it, huh? For $20 super chat. How can I say no to that? Sean, is there any particular part of the code you'd like us to look at in the next stream? I'd like to. You don't have to answer now. Just hit me up, private chat, DM
I suppose
me.
we could have a look at maybe dividing out the dependencies ourselves, coming up with like the
Yeah.
individual sub managers. Give an example of how we might refactor this a little bit.
Maybe I think this is a good, easy one, the level one, just to kind of take a look at how we can extrapolate that, encapsulate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Sean, we'll take a look at it in the next one. That'll be next week. I think. Yeah. No, go ahead.
If anybody wants a particularly detailed look at object pooling, I highly recommend the blog Cat Like Coding. There's a fantastic series on that.
Very good.
Which will, and it's my favorite form of educational material, which doesn't just give you answers, it shows you the problem and then solves the problem. So if you follow the blog section on the object pool, it will go through it slowly and say, let's create objects, see the effects, look how things slow down, let's apply a pool, let's see what that does. How do we make the pool more modular? And it beautiful, fantastic website. Like pretty much every resource on that website is fantastic.
Yeah, that guy's great. I follow him on LinkedIn, and I love logging in and seeing a new blog post from him. Good stuff. Devin brings up a good point. We did kind of, well, I think we were more self-aware this time around that, you know, we kind of found our way into some pedantic issues. But, you know, we're learning. Jason and I, this is our second or third code review. So thank you guys for the feedback.
I will say, here's the thing that I guess from my summary looking at this is there's two ways to do a code review. You can do a code review, which is, can this code be hypothetically cleaner? Or you can do a code review saying these things have performance hitches or memory problems that kind of should be resolved. And the thing is, right, there's a lot of great coding practices here. As far as the actual code, if we're critiquing naming conventions, use of white space, the various different design choice, the naming of functions, the fact that we can just go through it all without really having any trouble understanding it means all of that stuff is perfectly fine. Like there's nothing there that jumps out at us, and there's nothing to code review. Like we can kind of say, you know, like for example, I don't use the word private in my serialized fields. Charles does. You can get into these really pernickety little details, but it's not relevant. The stuff that matters is, does it do what it needs to? Yes. Could we refactor it into like a multi-part, 5-part system that does all this stuff? We can, and we can demonstrate how, as you scale this application, you might have to. But to kind of follow our own advice, the theme of this particular thing is keep it simple, right? Doesn't need it, does it? Like we don't need to go in and make a multi-part system because it doesn't need it. But I would say the Doom level is a good example of, hang on, this is a different requirement from the existing ones. Maybe we can isolate that so that if we wanted to add a Quake level, or, you know, we'd be able to do that without having to rewrite or edit the existing game manager. Yeah. That's a good example of how we might demonstrate more refactoring. But I don't qualify that as a code review. I call that, I don't know, something along the lines of a refactoring example or something. That's sort of a step above code review.
Right.
And that's like adding new features and how do you build for extensibility. So code review wise, like there just isn't much to talk about. It's fine. There's nothing there. So that's a good compliment I can give, you know?
Yeah, I know, Sean, great code. We'll certainly talk about it and see if we can fit this into the next stream. If you would like to have your code reviewed, I know we have a couple submissions in the back in the pipe here. Be sure to send your submissions to infalliblecode /code-review, and we'd be happy to get to it eventually. Yeah, we're still kind of workshopping how this stream is going to go. Jason and I have discussions about some ideas we want to kind of try out. So stick with us. Thank you for coming. I see a lot of faces here from our previous streams. So it's really glad to see you. I think we're building a really cool community around these streams specifically. So yeah, this was great. I think we're going to wrap it up now, though. We'll be streaming again next Tuesday. I don't think I can do Wednesdays anymore, unfortunately. So we're going to try to shoot. Sorry, I'm just telling you this now, Jason, by the way, live. So I'm thinking Tuesdays at 3 p.m. So keep an eye out for those. 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I should say. So keep an eye out for those. Last thing I'll say is just kind of some meta stuff. Be sure to like the video. Be sure to check out the clips from the previous stream. Like all those and watch those. Leave a comment if you find anything interesting you want to talk about. And also be sure to check out the video that I posted on Sunday. Really would appreciate it. So yeah, Jason, you got anything else you want to part with?
No, I think that's it. Just double down on the likes and the more people seem to like these, the more we'll kind of figure out what we can do to scale them up and make them better. So
Yeah,
we appreciate everybody enjoying the content. So
definitely,
thanks.
definitely. All right. Well, I think that's it's as good as a sign off as any. So we'll see you guys later. In fact, we'll see you guys on Discord. Why don't you hop on over there and maybe we'll be hanging
we
out.
always forget to say that.
Yeah.
There is a Discord. Join it. We're there. I mean, if you have questions like these and you weren't able to catch the live stream, or there's you want to actually paste a load of code examples and stuff, there's a load of people there who will help you out with your questions, and you can talk through them in more detail. I will just note there are channels, so keep an eye on the channels that are there and try to find the one relative to the question you have.
Definitely. All right, guys. Well, have a good day. See you later.
Look.